What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Walkout Network. It's your man, Ant Walker, here with another edition of Unleashed, the weekly panel discussion show. And of course, as always, we have a fine guest to anchor the panel. That guest this week is Simon Samano. You know him as the managing editor of MMA Junkie. Simon, how are you doing today, my man?
I'm doing good, guys. Thanks for having me.
Definitely appreciate you stopping by. I know you're a busy man running things over at Junkie, so appreciate you taking the time out. Now, of course, you guys know who the other two gentlemen on this panel are. We're going to start with the senior editor of Shirto.com. He is the jack of all trades who has mastered them all, Mr. Ben Duffy. Ben, how are you doing today, my man?
I'm doing well. It's a beautiful day here in Houston, Texas. I mowed my lawn. I've got a giant glass of water. And once again, you have a sufficiently prestigious guest that I have to sit up at attention and behave myself on the show. So.
We got the guests have to bring the class that we don't bring. Hey. So I'm just gonna say that. Do you have whiskey flavored water today, or is it like water?
It is water.
All right. So now, of course, the man with the numbers, the man with all the stats and figures. He is the associate editor of Shirto.com. My friend Jay Petrie. Jay, what's going on today, brother?
You know, I don't know about you guys, but I feel kind of refreshed after a big fight week. Now, this was a hurricane of fights. Boom, 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 back off. But yeah, I feel back in the saddle again, and I'm hoping you guys too. So dropping my stat of the week. Stat of the week is about the Wednesday event, and Duffy's shaking his head because he might know. So the stat of the week is 1. So Glover Teixeira, his stoppage of Anthony Smith, came in the 5th round at about 1 minute 4 seconds. Glover Teixeira is the only fighter in UFC history to ever win and lose a fight in the 5th round, because he fought Alexander Gustafsson at UFC Fight Night 109 in 2017 and got knocked out. So yeah, that's Glover Teixeira, man. He'll go in there until he's burger.
Yeah, he will.
Definitely want to talk a little bit more about Glover Teixeira, and we'll do that in just a few minutes here. But first, let's talk about what happened over the weekend, the final event in the trio of UFC events that took place in Jacksonville, Florida. Alistair Overeem defeats Walt Harris by TKO in the 2nd round. Pretty dramatic fight as far as the ebb and flows, but and I do want to get into the fight itself. But first, I think the most pressing thing that is on the minds of a lot of people, at least from what I can tell from the timeline, was the storyline behind Walt Harris, his return to the cage. Obviously, he and his family suffered a huge tragic loss in the murder of Aniah Blanchard, his stepdaughter. So his first time back in the cage, a lot of emotion for obvious reasons. Now, we did hear a lot about that on the broadcast. There were some people out there who were a little iffy about whether it was appropriate or not, but I'd like to get the feeling of the panel here. And all 4 of us have had some experience as far as covering this in a professional capacity, a story that has a deeper effect than the normal wins and losses that we cover in technique and whatever the case may be in martial arts. But gentlemen, what's the overall feeling on the panel? I mean, are we okay with the way the UFC marketed this fight?
I'll jump in. I'm normally fairly quick to criticize things the UFC does in marketing, at least as far as I experienced in the lead up to this fight. None of it really bothered me. They had to say something. It would have been an even more ridiculous omission if they simply acted as though nothing had happened to this man in the past 6 months. So given that they had to say something about it, you know, even just the regular lead up to a headline fight, the usual kind of, little promotional clips that they do, they couldn't ask the questions that they ask a normal fighter. They couldn't show the normal clips of them going about their day in and out of training without touching on this. So they had to say something. And as far as how they handled it, I didn't find it exploitative. It wasn't it didn't feel cheap. I mean, it was very emotional, but it was emotional because he was emotional. I mean, he broke into tears on camera, but it's not like they had, weepy music going in the background to play up the moment. I thought it was handled as well as it could have been for a very difficult situation for everybody.
Yeah, I would actually if I could chime in, I would actually agree with Ben for the most part. The story has been really difficult to cover for all of us. But when you knew Walt Harris was coming back, ESPN trying to appeal to sort of a broader audience on the big ESPN network, they have a fighter who's got this tremendously gut-wrenching story who's going to headline. They're going to go all in on trying to, connect the audience with this fighter in a certain way, because you may have, more fans coming in who are just casuals, as you would say, folks who don't normally watch fighting. So I thought they handled it well. And I was especially okay when they got Tom Rinaldi involved and he did that long ESPN Sports Center feature. I don't know if you guys saw it. I thought it was tremendous and really well done. I mean, Tom Rinaldi gets involved in all those types of stories, that are hard to tell. I thought he told it really beautifully. And I would imagine none of this was done without Walt's, approval. So I generally didn't have an issue with it at all.
Yeah, chiming on it, I felt uncomfortable, and it wasn't entirely because of the subject matter, because I've covered for Sherdog. I covered almost the entirety of the story from start to finish. It kept on falling, news and details and updates kept falling on the days I cover news, so I would be writing as it developed. I felt uncomfortable a little bit. I don't know if it's because I was so close to it, which very well could be it, because I covered play-by-play for the site, so I am locked in. Every commercial, every thing, every clip that comes on, I'm paying attention. So it may be because I was like glued to the screen, I felt I took it a little more. But it's part of the story, and it isn't a story in terms of weaving a narrative. No, this is what this fighter has been dealing with since he last competed. He can't do the shadow boxing stuff because there's a much bigger part of the story that has to be addressed. And you guys are right. I mean, the way ESPN handled it, one of the old adages, ESPN and Sports Illustrated get the human interest. They really get because we know the ins and outs of the story, but we are we are a 1% of 1% of the audience, that knows this information. Everybody else just, it's this big lumbering heavyweight. So this made people care about it. Now, I think it was Jonathan Snowden who said it, and he felt a little harder on it than we did, that he felt that it was, as Steffi mentioned, a little exploitative because it was pushing it so hard. One of the things that got to me is that I imagined what Walt Harris is going through backstage or wherever they had him kept, because they had locker rooms, kind of blocked off for different people, that the screens are on. So he has to relive this 10 minutes before he fights, a half hour before he fights, an hour before he fights. That felt off to me. But, for all this, and we'll get into this, I felt for Overeem, man. I did. I felt for Overeem because there's a no-win situation for him. But the UFC kind of, and ESPN, I think, in a whole, handled Walt Harris about as well as they could.
I think it's notable to mention, too, that the Harris and Blanchard family has been trying to impact legislation in their home state of Alabama as a direct result of the unfortunate passing of Aniah. So I do believe that this was a very deliberate effort to get some of those wheels in motion. But I think as far as the audience is concerned, and I think all of us as men with families and people that we care about and loved ones that are human beings before we were fight fans, that this story touched a nerve that you don't expect to get touched when you're talking about cage fighting. We typically, the most serious stories that we talk about involve PED scandals or fighter pay or something along those lines, which are very important stories, but not something that literally can rip the soul out of a human being. And I think especially now where sports is one of those things where it reminds people of a time where the world wasn't quarantined and we were living normal lives, that escapism has become more important. So when you have this ugly, disgusting, just horribly tragic story attached to it, kind of takes that facade away. It takes the the escapism away, and we're forced to face, quite frankly, an ugly, disgusting world that has bled its way into something that we normally take joy in, forgetting about our problems every Saturday. So I don't personally have much of a problem with the way it was marketed, knowing that Walt Harris had to sign off on it in some way, shape, or form. Knowing what his family is attempting to do as far as legislation is concerned, and also too, as Simon pointed out, the casual fan not being privy to what's going on, and that being something that most people can relate to, those emotions, the emotions of loss or fear, and that being a hook for the viewer. So I'm okay with it. But I do want to ask you, Simon, because out of everyone who has had to cover this story, and as difficult as it has been, you recently faced a lot of misguided backlash, in my opinion, on the verbiage in a recent article. The word "slain" being used. I can't quite understand what that's about. The word "slain" is very appropriate term used in journalism since the day before forever. So Simon, I don't know, anything you'd like to say in regards to that?
No, I mean, if anybody's paid attention to my Twitter feed, my little old Twitter feed, I don't have a whole lot of followers, but suddenly had something blow up here. I used the word "slain" in a headline to describe what happened to Aniah. And as you pointed out, it's a normal thing that we use in this business. But I think to what you're saying is, all the backlash that I received for using that word, it probably speaks to what you just said, Ant, in terms of the lack of escapism and how, this has been in people's faces for the last 6 months, or at least intensely for a month, while they were searching for her. And all we've been wondering ever since that time is when Walt's going to come back. How is his family dealing with this? And you consider the fact that it was a 19-year-old girl, who suffered through this unspeakable thing. So the fact that people were taking issue to that headline. Look, I don't want to make this about myself, but I did my best in this role of covering a really difficult story. To make sure that I'm not shying away from the truth, as difficult as it is, try not to shy away from the truth. And in categorizing what happened to Aniah as, her being his slain stepdaughter, accurately, appropriately, legally, I guess the only thing I would say, is understand that, I'm simply the messenger in this instance. And I'm not trying to be insensitive to what happened. To the situation, but we have a role in journalism, and our role is to just adhere to the truth, adhere to accuracy, do things the right way, and I did the best I could on this one. Unfortunately, it didn't resonate very well with a lot of fight fans. I can't understand why. Slain is a word that is commonly used, and for that, I guess we chalk it up to MMA. Being MMA, I'm honestly not sure what to chalk it up to. I did not expect that to happen. So, we can move on from it, move past it. But hopefully people can take away that, hey, just the messenger in this case. That's it.
Absolutely. Well said.
We can move on from it in just a second, because Simon is being far too kind and far too humble here. Slain is literally the right word to use here. Far from being insensitive, it is the sensitive word to use. It is less blunt than killed, and it does not carry the legal implications of murdered. You can't say murdered.
Right. Yeah, like you can't say murdered. I mean, right. Like the way that I can best describe what happened and why this took on a life of its own. There's two things, and I want to make one thing clear, actually, guys. I would not have interjected myself into this had I not, if I didn't have to. So. The background here is that Nolan King wrote that story, and Nolan brought it to my attention that he was taking some shit for the headline. And when he brought that thread, the original thread, to my attention, and I saw all the bad things that people were saying, and then I saw people were tweeting him, I said to myself, okay, I I can't let that misconception stay out there. So that's why I got involved. I wouldn't have even gotten involved. Normally, I just let those responses just they are what they are. Right. But that's the reason why I wasn't going to let my guy be the fall guy for that. So then I go ahead and I chime in, and that was the only reason why. And then from there, it just blew up. I think what really didn't help my case was Michael Bisping getting involved. And when Michael Bisping got involved, it seemed like it brought like a whole new wave of people to that thread. I was surprised. Like, my phone battery was draining on Saturday, and I didn't know why. And then I saw a whole bunch of things, and I didn't know about the Michael Bisping thing because all he did was reply to somebody who called for my job, and he said, like, agree. It was one word reply, agree. But it brought a whole bunch of responses. And the only reason why I was alerted to that is because somebody told me in that original thread, even Bisping thinks you should be fired. I was like, wait, what? So confused. So I had to go seek that out. And I was like, well, this all makes sense now. This is why it's blown up. I did not know it was going to blow up the way it was.
And it is just people showing off their ignorance. It is a journalist doing absolutely the right job, and people who learn their English, literally learn their English from video games. Yeah. And so that word carries a different connotation to them, but their ignorance doesn't get to dictate a journalist's right way to do their job. And if Bisping really knew what he was replying to when he said that, then he's apparently written more books than he's read. I have no other way to classify that.
I mean, I'd love to know what Bisping thought he was agreeing to. I don't know. I don't care to tweet him and find out or anything like that. That's not something that I'm interested in. I mean, I don't know what he thought he was, replying to. Maybe it takes a different connotation in England, in the UK. I don't know. That's possible. I'll give some benefit of the doubt, I guess. But I think the thing is, after I explained myself to people, which I thought covered my bases, I did it appropriately. I did it legally. It's the right word. Oh, hey, look, New York Times uses it. ESPN uses it. They used it the day after Kennedy was assassinated. You'd think some people would say, oh, okay, well, maybe I'm the one with the issue here. Maybe I'm the one who doesn't quite understand. Nope. Everybody pushed all in. And I'm normally not going to do what I did and do that thread and write a long thread like that. But when you start calling for my job and start questioning my reputation and my character just for me doing my job the right way, now you're talking about affecting my family's livelihood. I'm not going to take that lightly. And that's the only reason why I wrote the thread. That's really the only reason why.
Totally understandable. The one mistake I'd say you made in there, Simon, is applying actual logic to MMA Twitter. That's the one mistake.
But even by the standards,
call me an idealist.
Even by the standards, this is about as wrong as I've seen the MMA Twitter mob be about something.
Which is why I was very quick to see that and realize, wait a second, there is no part of the story in any facet that you did something incorrect, that there was any sort of malpractice, so to speak. There was any sort of issue to be raising and saying it the way you said it. So
and just to bring it full circle to us talking about, the sensitivity of the topic of Aniah's, tragic killing, there's one of two reasons that I can surmise that people may have gotten upset. Number one, they don't know the meaning of the word slain. They literally haven't read a dictionary. Okay. Yep. So there's that. Number two, describing her death regardless, because she's a young college student who went through this, describing it using any word, was gonna set off this particular segment of the audience. I don't think that's
a no-win situation.
And that's unfortunately, it just was a no-win situation, even though you do nothing wrong.
No, fair points.
I mean, we in Sherdog for a very brief second took some flack when her remains were identified, because in fact her remains were identified. It's a horrible thing. It hurts me to say it again, having covered it months ago, but it happened, and it's terrible and it's tragic. But we, as reporters of the news as it happens, cover it accurately and properly. So yeah, I feel you, man.
No, I appreciate that, guys.
All right, thanks, Simon, for speaking on that. But let's go ahead and move on
Alistair
to the
Overeem guy.
the actual fights that we came here to discuss originally. Alistair Overeem, as we mentioned before, won the fight against Walt Harris, that main event Saturday night by TKO in the second round. He had some, it wasn't exactly a post-fight interview that'll knock your socks off. He didn't say anything in there that was too stunning, but he did make his intentions very clear that he wanted to go on another title run. So the question I'm going to throw at you, gentlemen, is: do you think that Alistair Overeem has another UFC title run in him?
Well, I want to speak on something. I don't think he needs anybody to speak on his behalf. But the way Overeem handled himself, at least from everything I observed, I have to applaud him for it. Because, I mean, obviously he was one of about 3 people in the building celebrating his win, a dramatic win in a main event by knockout after overcoming adversity and everything leading up to it. And
on
he
his
still
birthday.
was on right before his
his birthday.
Yeah.
he turned 40 10 minutes after he won the fight. I mean, the way he handled himself and his post-fight interview was respectful. It was muted. He said the things he did. He expressed his thoughts to Walt. He did the things that he should have done to carry on, to not dwell on it, and to not go, oh man, I feel anything like that. Which, if he were younger and less of a veteran, and Overeem's or that era beforehand, he may not have. So I did appreciate the veteran savvy across the board of Alistair Overeem, not just in the fight being able to survive, although I may or may not have thought the fight should have been stopped. That the way everything about it, Overeem did its best. He made the best of a bad situation, because like I mentioned before, there was a no-win situation. He wins by knockout. The best thing that can happen for him is the worst thing that can happen for 99% of the people watching, given the coverage that they had just seen. I mean, Walt Harris was the sentimental favorite for a reason. Okay, go back to the original question. Does he have a run in him? Dude, heavyweights have such longevity that, yes, he does, just by the sheer nature of the division. However, he doesn't have a lot of fresh faces to run up against that aren't 2 or 3 rematches in. I think there's only 2 guys that are ranked above him he hasn't fought besides Cormier, Volkov and Lewis. So make it either of those happen. But the way he's lost against the people he's lost to, you will never, ever forget the uppercut. If Ngannou wins the belt, Overeem will never sniff it. That's never going to happen. But otherwise, Overeem, he's going to try and fight his way back up, and we'll see how long his chin and his legs hold out, because he just turned 40, guys. It's got another 5 years in him or so.
Is there a bigger Daniel Cormier fan in the world now than Alistair Overeem? I think if you're Alistair Overeem, you want DC to come back and win the belt and decide he's going to stick around for a couple more fights, more than ever at this point. I think it's also notable too, the fight, as you said, the calamity that befell Overeem in the Ngannou fight, the way he lost the Stipe fight. Actually spawned an entire outlet in StipeTap.com. So
Stipe did not tap.
so I think that's important to remember as well. So gentlemen, now what do you think is the appropriate matchup for Overeem coming up next?
That's tough. That's honestly a hard thing. It's a hard thing to figure out. Derek Lewis. Maybe Derek Lewis, that's the fight. I'm not sure exactly, because he's fought all those guys above. And to the question about whether or not he has a run in him, I mean, yeah, who's he beating the second time around? To still get over that hump. Is he beating Francis if they fight again? I mean, there's a chuckle right there, so we don't think that's happening. By the sheer nature, like he could act like. A Jairzinho rematch now is worthless. Like Jairzinho would have needed to have won and beaten Francis for Alistair to then say, which moves him in the rankings, right? That would move Jairzinho up the rankings. Now Alistair can say, yo, that was a fluke. We need to run that back, et cetera, et cetera. Right. He doesn't even want to do that now. So there just seems like there's too many roadblocks. Like, how does he get up there? And how does he get up there in a timely fashion? I don't even know.
You know, strangely enough, I mean, we know so little about Ngannou, whether or not he's evolved at all. There is a path to victory for him there, but I don't think it's likely necessarily. And then also too, like since the Stipe fight, he has improved. Um, so there's something there. He was beating Rosenstruck up until he wasn't in the final round of that fight. So I don't know. I mean, heavyweight MMA is perhaps the strangest just bundle of mystery in all of sports. So there are paths, but I wonder if the clock is going to be going up against Overeem at this point.
Yeah, it's he's got a path on the notion that stranger things have happened. Stranger things have happened. That's his chance.
Right.
I mean, if he beats Dos Santos, if they, for some reason they were to rematch, you can see them catapulting him up there. I'm not saying, I'm just the way that the division is going. You can see stranger things have definitely happened already, and suddenly having Overeem skip Ngannou because reasons.
I mean, we're talking about the same division where Mark Hunt entered the UFC sub 500 and then find himself fighting for a title. So anything can happen in heavyweight mixed martial arts. All right, gentlemen. Now, of course, one of the other stories to come out of UFC on ESPN 8 was the fact that the judges seemed to raise the ire of many folks watching the event. So very quickly, one of the decisions that you were bothered by the most, I'll start with you, Simon. What decision at that event did you disagree with the most?
The one that I disagree with the most would have been, I thought Angie beat Claudia Gadelha. I thought, and that may be like maybe a strange thing to say, because there was one round in that fight that was clearly won, which was the first round, which was won by Claudia. No doubt about it. She won that round. But I just thought in rounds 2 and 3, Angie made the adjustments. The striking was there. Claudia was wearing the damage on her face. I just thought she won both of those rounds. I thought she did enough. Claudia said that she intentionally, basically afterwards, she said that she basically intentionally got away from her wrestling because she wanted to stand up and strike. And I just didn't, she wanted to test herself in the striking department. And I just didn't really think that, I thought Angie really showed herself and deserved that win. So that would be the one for me.
All right. Jay, what decision did you disagree with the most?
I was really between Hill and Barboza's because I actually scored them both in the Sherdog play-by-play for Angela Hill and for Edson Barboza. But I think I have to give it to Angela Hill because the Simon, he's spot on. First round, Claudia Gadelha. Second round, however, Hill dropped her, like straight up scored a knockdown, which is the biggest point of the fight, I would say, by a wide margin. So boom, all things being relatively similar, the knockdown would give me that second round pretty handy. And then the third round, I mean, Claudinha, as her nickname is now, I don't know why it's Claudinha for her nickname. She was throwing bombs. She was doing the Bobby Southworth kind of turn and throw hooks like this kind of mess, and it worked more often than it didn't, which kind of surprised me. I thought Hill was a little sharper, but Hill did outland her by a significant margin. I looked at the numbers. It was, 40-30 or something. It wasn't a minor little thing. And damage is not a scoring criteria, but I feel it has to play a factor when it comes to effective striking, because you're effectively striking and making her face into mush. It wasn't like Darren Elkins, but she lumped her up. So I gave that fight to Hill.
All right, Ben, what about you?
Same. On the Ige and Barboza fight, reasonable minds can definitely differ, and I'm apparently in the minority in thinking that Vera beat Song. So the only one that I was like, this is a flat out bad decision, was Hill versus Gadelha.
Yeah, I think it's unanimous on this panel. I gave that fight to Angela Hill. I wasn't too upset with the Ige Barboza decision. Jutko, Eric Anders could have gone either way. That was just somebody described it on Twitter as a 15-minute takedown attempt. So that was funny. and I was okay with Song Yadong defeating Marlon Vera. So the Hill Gadelha one, but I think this was one of those decisions where you call into question the scoring system, or at least how the scoring system is being applied, as opposed to just judges being wrong. I think that's too simplistic of a take for this one. Do you favor the heavier shots that Gadelha was landing, or do you favor the faster, less powerful but more frequent offense of Angela Hill? So, and I think that's the discussion that we've had many times and will continue to have throughout.
Can I throw? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to point out one thing. Sal D'Amato was involved in most of the controversial decisions at that event.
Good point.
There you go.
I was going to throw an X factor out there in this new environment, but a lot of times whenever there's questionable decisions, we talk about the crowd noise and the judges being influenced by the oohs and the ahs. Now that's gone. Okay, that's gone now. Now you think to yourself, are the judges responding to the loud corners, the reactions to the shots that their fighters are throwing, the oohs, the ahs? Yeah, I mean, if I'm in the corner in this new normal, if we're going to have empty arenas, I'm responding every time my fighter throws something, and it may not even land crisp or land well, but it's going to sure as hell sound like it to a judge, and I'm going to make it seem like my fighter is on point, whether or not they are. Something to consider, I think, moving forward.
Right. That's the tactic.
The Shevchenko.
Exactly.
Yeah, corners do that now. Like even with a crowd, they'll do that. I know Greg Jackson has been very public about that, to repeat a fighter's name over and over again, to try to plant subliminal messages in the judges' minds. Like it's even more so now without a crowd. Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think the impact of the shots has to register. Go, damn, you feel. I think even the commentators are like, God, I can feel everything. I can hear that. I think it was Felder who was talking about how loud those shots were.
Sure, yeah. It might be something like five jabs, a jab, and then the other person comes back with the boom. Yeah. And that just resonates so much more. It's very possible.
Well, I think another thing too, Jay, you just kind of sparked this idea in my brain. What if they're responding to the commentary? We've heard the fighters say that they can hear the commentators.
Oh, yeah.
They're. I mean, it's got to be kind of trippy to be in your fight and hear the commentary track as you're performing. But
Daniel Cormier for Coach of the Year.
Yeah, exactly. Daniel Cormier has coached everybody throughout this entire pandemic. The couple of media members that I've talked to that were there saying they could hear the commentary very clearly from whatever random seat they were given in the arena. So this seems like that would make a good case for why there needs to be a change to the system itself. Maybe judges need to be isolated and need to just have all sound and commentary and all crowd noise removed and just watch the action that's in front of them. Because obviously now we can't blame the crowd.
Yeah, imagine if a fight's going on and Paul Felder goes, "Oh, he's hurt." Judge thinks damaging strike. Yeah, it's very reasonable to think that Sal D'Amato would be paying attention to that.
Right. That so it brings two thoughts in my head. So one, we see this reaction if you try to watch a fight at a bar. The bar responds to something 100%. And then that sways the way everyone judges a fight. And then I also think, does Sal D'Amato, Cecil Peoples, and Adelaide Byrd have a group chat? So just throw that out there. All right. So let's move on to Wednesday's event. The main event of that presented its own bit of controversy. Glover Teixeira absolutely decimated Anthony Smith. The fight was called in the last round. A lot of people, myself included, were very unhappy with how late that stoppage took place. And in a very strange twist, a normally very divided MMA world, there seemed to be a general consensus here that this stoppage came way too late. Jason Herzog, who was the referee for this main event, took full responsibility for that late stoppage. But gentlemen, I need to ask you, how much fault do you put on his shoulders?
Very little. I think it's an offshoot of the same phenomenon we just finished speaking about. In the empty arena where you could hear everything. And I mean, we're used to, I mean, if you've been to like small local shows, or obviously if you watch the Contender Series or fights on Tough, you're used to hearing fights in a quiet room, but you're not used to hearing fights in a silent arena where you can hear the breathing. You can hear like leather and fabric like squeaking when people are in the clinch. That fight, I mean, it was a brutal beating. It could have been stopped earlier with no complaint. The towel could have been thrown in, whatever, but it sounded absolutely hellish in that environment. And it made me think of other fights that were similarly protracted beatdowns, like Amanda Nunes versus Raquel Pennington, which is another one that drew criticism to her corner for not stopping the fight. Or Miocic versus Hunt, you know, like kind of those ones where the outcome was no longer in question after about the second round, and it just turned into this death march. Yeah. How different might we have felt about those if they'd taken place in the same environment? And how much of the almost unanimous ire towards the ref or the corner or whatever is due to this shared experience of just hearing how bad it was for Anthony Smith, just hearing the grunts every time he got punched, hearing Teixeira like basically apologizing for like kicking his ass. Like, dude, that was poignant. Yeah. Like that actually made me feel some kind of way, which I'm not typically used to getting from the in-cage product when I watch, you know, MMA. So I'm loath to overreact for that reason. It was a terrible beating. I would have been perfectly happy if his corner had stopped it after the third round, even certainly the fourth. I would have been fine if Herzog had stopped it earlier, but I don't see the calling for his head.
Yeah, that was it was a tough one to watch. I mean, I will say this though. Now that we know what we know in terms of what happened afterwards in the main event at UFC on ESPN 8, you know, and maybe there was questions about whether or not that fight should have been stopped in the first round when Walt was laying it on him. I just want to underscore the fact that referees have an incredibly difficult job of deciding when and when not to let a fighter continue. I could see from Herzog's point that during that fight, Anthony Smith's just not turtled up long enough at any point, really, to throw it in, like to call the fight off. I think it lands more on his corner. It lands on his corner to save him from himself. And that's the one thing that people, I guess, in general, tend to forget, at least in the moment, is that these fighters need to be saved from themselves, period. I mean, that's it. And really, first and foremost, it's the corner's job in a situation like that, I think, before it's the referee's job. I thought Herzog, it was good of him to take responsibility for it because he has the benefit of hindsight and looking back at it. But as I watched the fight and I knew Anthony Smith was getting beat real bad, there was never really a moment that he just turtled up long enough that somebody wouldn't give him the opportunity to try and mount a comeback. And now after the ESPN 8 main event, you know, who's to say that maybe there was a moment where you thought it could have happened? I don't know. It's just these guys, man, the referees have tough jobs, tough jobs.
I think it was the beginning of the fourth round, I believe, where Smith came out firing. Glover crowded him, and Smith got off a really quick short elbow and made Glover take a step back. It was that one moment I'm like, wait a second,
yeah,
hold on. But that was one 15-second burst in an additional 12-minute beating, give or take.
If you're a referee though, and you see that, it sticks in your mind, right? I got to give this guy a chance to win. He's
not only throwing, he's throwing hard and effectively and damaging. Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. He was intelligently defending himself within the definition of the rule because he kept moving. He didn't stay in one place. He didn't do anything in particular to surrender in that way. And that's something that's I guess that's to Smith's credit and detriment because I don't blame Herzog much. You know, maybe 10% of the 100% blame negligence timeline if you want to go that way. But we don't want to go that way. His corner, Smith could have thrown in the towel. There's a lot of blame on Smith and his team.
Yeah. There's questions about whether or not it was his teeth or his veneers that were being knocked out.
He clarified it was his teeth. His corner said his corner said
veneers.
Said veneers because he's lost veneers before, but Smith came out the next day and he's like, no, I lost teeth.
I mean, that's the way he said it wasn't like, hey guys, I want to keep going. We heard the audio.
Yeah.
We all heard that. It wasn't like there was no sound in his voice that was like, but I want to keep going. He's got too much pride to say I want to quit. But it was like, I'm losing my teeth.
Right.
Like
reading the body language as to see what I think most of us saw someone who was defeated in every way, shape, and form, making his way back to that corner, and then for him to get up off of that corner and make that march back to the center of the octagon was very jarring. But I think I think, as you said very wisely, Simon, I mean, we forget that fighters need to be saved from themselves a lot of times, and I think Anthony Smith, since this has happened, has proven this in droves. I mean, I think he came out the next day detailing the injuries, which included 2 or 3 missing teeth, broken orbital, broken nose, and then was also in the same breath had some sort of backlash for the people that were questioning the stoppage and saying, well, this should have been stopped sooner. And then to double down on that with now criticizing Jason Herzog for doing the classiest thing possible, something that not nearly enough refs take the opportunity to do, and that's publicly address potential shortcomings, to him, for him now to pretty much just shoot this one down. I mean, if there wasn't a better case for fighters being saved from themselves, I think Anthony Smith is proving exactly why that phrase exists.
I mean, the unified rules, this is one thing I want to call for. I don't know if there's a movement to begin. The unified rules need to be slightly modified. It is currently a foul for the corner to throw in the towel while the round's progressing. They can stop the fight between rounds, but technically the corner is not allowed to stop the fight when the fight is in motion, so to speak. So that needs to stop. I mean, that there's no reason that at any point, I don't know, Mark Montoya would decide to go, okay, it's over here. But I think like Duke Rufus, who is one of the better corners to say, all right, you're done here, like Anthony Pettis against Tony Ferguson, where it's like, I'm not going to send you out like this. Yeah. You can't do what you want to do. You're falling apart. Your hands are like this. We're done here. Yeah, I mean, corners should be, because then maybe that would help to remove some of the stigma of the corner stoppage. Because, you know, you hear fighters getting trashed on for tapping the strikes, which is the ludicrous claim that, for instance, anti-George St. Pierre advocates go, well, GSP tapped the strikes. Even if he did, so what? What is the alternative? Getting punched until the referee says, yeah, he's going to have brain damage unless I stop this. So, yeah, I think there needs to be a destigmatization of corner stoppages and fighters ending it, because, come on.
Oh.
Well,
I was just gonna say, I mean, it's not the most beautiful or heroic looking thing if a fighter taps the strikes, but are you gonna leave your like cerebral health up to the ref? Like, dude, if Mario Yamasaki was my referee, I wouldn't even trust myself to tap the strikes. I'd have a fucking cyanide pill in my mouth.
I'm surprised none of us have brought up the Valentina Shevchenko Priscilla Cachoeira fight. I mean, that was a very,
that wasn't a fight,
slaughterhouse.
Right. That was an egregious example of what we're talking about, you know? Yeah. The one thing I think is worth asking, or at least just throwing it out there as a thought, is what agreement do the fighters have with their corner, you know, before they step out there? Don't throw the towel no matter what. You know, we don't know that. That could factor in to it, but that's a cultural thing that needs to change. If that is happening, I'm just saying, if it is, that's a cultural thing that I'd love to see a shift. You know, I'd love to see a shift.
Simon, you bring up an excellent point, and I think part of the implied contract, the way MMA contract is put together, 9 times out of 10 implies that the corner is not going to stop the fight, because if you get paid half the amount for losing, you are much less likely to call it quits.
You're opening up a can of worms there.
Paycheck.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Right. So there are a lot of things culturally wrong with the sport of MMA that lead to these sort of circumstances.
Correct.
That lead to these things happening. I mean, granted, boxing isn't immune to it. I mean, we're just a couple of months removed from Deontay Wilder threatening to fire the cornerman that quite literally saved his life in the Tyson Fury rematch. Of course, he went back on that, and that trainer is back a part of his camp. So cooler heads did prevail, but culturally, yes, there needs to be a shift in mixed martial arts. Now, gentlemen, let's give Glover Teixeira just a little bit more shine here, because he is now above the age of 40, and once again, he finds himself in true title contendership in the UFC's light heavyweight division. So, granted, Jon Jones did turn him back in pretty dominant fashion when he had his title shot. I believe that was UFC 172, where that fight took place. But now, 40 years old, over 40 years old, Glover Teixeira, does he have a better chance at defeating Jon Jones now?
Yes, not because he's especially better, but just because Jones appears to have his hands full more often with his challengers these days. I wrote this up in my post whatever article. Like, Glover Teixeira has been the same fighter for the 16 or 17 years that I've been a fan of this sport. Right. He's looked 47 since he was 27. He's had the same basic game where if it is possible to underrate every facet of a fighter's game while acknowledging that he's one of the top 10 fighters in the world, Glover Teixeira is the guy that invites that. You know, like, his striking has always kind of looked deliberate and plotting, even though his footwork and fundamentals allow him to beat quicker guys to the punch. His offensive and defensive wrestling are both consistently slept on. I mean, Corey Anderson and Jon Jones are the only fighters I can think of who really made him go where he didn't want to go in the last decade. And obviously, you know, he has an incredibly heavy top game that kind of gets overlooked just because for so long he was best known as a Hackleman guy and Chuck Liddell's main training partner. Like, it's possible to sleep on every facet of his game, even though he's one of the 10 best fighters in the world. Having said that, he's not a better fighter than he was 6 years ago, except in maybe very incremental ways. But Jones is finally starting to show some vulnerability. And anybody that can still be, you know, there hanging in there, throwing effective offense back at him in the 4th and 5th round, I mean, has a chance. Nobody's done it yet, but it's kind of looking like that day might be coming. Still wouldn't favor him, but I'd want to see it.
Oh no, favoring him, that's a far cry. But yeah, it really depends, because it light heavyweight. You know, who the heck knows who's going to get a title shot? Jan Blachowicz, Dominic Reyes, Glover's in the picture now, doing that to Smith, who is the consensus number 2, number 3 guy. I mean, Glover beat Smith like he was caught him breaking into his apartment. Like, it was there. It was the first round.
It's a little on the nose.
The first round was Smith had the success, which is where I could see Jones implement that kind of game plan. Keep at the edge of the jab, keep at distance, keep leg kicks going, whatever, that kind of stuff like that. But the way they fought the first time they fought, Jones took him down multiple times and never got taken down himself, which was a very important thing. If Jones decides to do what he's done the recent fights and kind of slug it out with Santos and Reyes for the most part, I don't want to say I'm giving Glover a chance, because, you know, it's Jon Jones we're talking about here. But if Jones fights trying to say, I'm going to beat you at your own game, like a GSP used to do that to certain other guys, he can have his hands full. He could have another split decision that he'll obviously win. Of course, he's going to win a split decision. Duh, it's Jon Jones. I'm with Duffy. I don't see what Glover Teixeira brings to the table that didn't have before. Glover can be patient, and patience doesn't beat Jon Jones. I mean, we don't really know what beats Jon Jones, but we have seen glimpses of what could beat Jon Jones. So if Glover Teixeira gives it to him, if he isn't afraid of him this time, if he doesn't get his older shoulder dislocated from the twist and shout, whatever happens, he could take a couple rounds. But man, you got to fight Jon Jones for 5 rounds. Good luck with that.
Yeah, I'm with Duffy too. I mean, Glover's been a great fighter for the last 15 years. He's been great throughout his UFC tenure. He's really good all around at a lot of things, but he doesn't have just that one thing. I don't think that's going to put him over the top to be able to get past Jon Jones, even past the Jon Jones who may be showing signs of declining. I don't see that happening.
I'm going to have to make that unanimous. I mean, in a world we're talking about, people are really hyped up about a 53-year-old Mike Tyson coming back and winning a title. Yeah, just because it's a cool story doesn't mean it's actually going to happen. Like, I'm sorry. Reality is Jon Jones is the greatest talent the sport has ever seen. He's still young. Glover Teixeira, aging, although he is working well with his age. He's training smarter. He's making better decisions in the cage that don't necessarily rely strictly on athleticism. So that's great. But when you're facing the greatest of all time, I'm sorry, reality is going to set in as it did at UFC 172. All right, so now we're going to move on to swing or miss, and I've got a very simple question for you three gentlemen here. The UFC's 3-event experiment in Jacksonville, Florida, amid the COVID-19 global pandemic, was it a success?
Who'd like to go first?
It happened. It happened, and that's I can't. I'm gonna take an intentional walk here. I'm not gonna swing or miss at this. I'm gonna let it go because it's still a little early to say. Because obviously Dana, I think he in the post-fight presser on Sunday morning officially, but Saturday night, Dana was like, "Yeah, this was like 105% success. We made it. We did it. Mission accomplished." Now you see the banner behind him almost.
Nobody got sick.
And no one got sick.
Except for Jacare.
That was an actual company line that no one got sick except for the fact that, oh, that's right. A couple people got sick. We don't know the specifics, ins and outs, when he was exposed to it, what happened, but and I don't want to rehash this because Ant, you killed it last week talking about how a little bit of screening could have probably solved a lot of issues. Man, I don't know if we're ever going to know if it was a failure. That's the worst part about this. I don't think we're going to get if something bad happens that come out unless a fighter is unafraid of retaliation, so to speak, of retribution, of punishment. Because I mean, John Oliver said this on last week tonight that there's no fighters union, so there's no negotiating power of any degree to protect yourself and make better decisions on this. And the anti-disparagement clause that we discussed last week, there were a lot of issues there that fighters were afraid to say something lest they be punished or thrown down the list. I mean, look, Stipe Miocic may lose his title just for doing those other things he's doing. I forget what he's doing. I think he's saving lives. Anyway, that's the hardest part of all of it. Is that we the media, not even the general public, we the media might not know until next month if people get sick from whatever happens. I mean, when did we find out about Diego Lima?
Lyman Good.
No, Lyman Good.
Lyman Good. Lyman Good.
Lyman Good. Thank you. Lyman Good. When Lyman Good got sick, how long after the fact?
Month.
Yes. So it's a success because the UFC can control the narrative with, what is it, a select amount of facts. The UFC can drive the narrative. I don't know who said that, but yeah. Anyway, I'm walking here.
Yeah, no, I pretty much agree with everything you just said. I just think it's important to note. Look, maybe I give the UFC it's a success with reservations for it to be a failure. Is essentially where I am. Is that it was success with the reservations to be a failure, and it almost could have been, but there are some facts that are indisputable. Number one, we know when Jacare showed up that he told them that he was sick. Why wasn't he removed then and there? So to me, we went into 249 with me thinking, what the hell are we doing? Like, we're just normalizing COVID? Okay, it doesn't have to be a disaster. All right, that's fine. Two of his cornermen are sick. Okay, this is bad. Why didn't they do that? Why didn't they just remove him from the situation altogether? We go into the following week. New York Times does a great job of pointing out, of getting the 25-page plan of what the coronavirus safety protocol was. we're pointing things out left and right. And we were all asking these questions, but just to have it all, here's the document that they submitted to get approval to do this event. It included no excessive touching, social distancing. We're not going to do, we're not going to do interviews inside the cage, et cetera, et cetera. It's hard for me to call it a complete success just because if the point was to prove to the sports world, and I think we have to take this broader than just MMA, this sport, and I say we in this sense of just being part of the MMA community and we're off to the side kind of the rest of the sports world. This was the chance for the sport to show this is how you do it. And Dana can say it was, 100% success, all he wants, but he didn't exactly show how much better it could have been. And why that is, I leave that to anybody to speculate. His ego, his attitude, renegade mentality, et cetera, et cetera. It is what it is when it comes to Dana and how he just, doesn't really have much regard for rules in general. So, yeah, it was a success with some reservations for it to still be a failure, depending on how these next couple weeks go. And if we see any results of any fighters who may or may not, have come down with it from being in Jacksonville.
Hey, I got a real quick question for you guys because I can't remember. It's been such a whirlwind. 249 championship fights happened. Dana presented the belts like normal, right?
Yeah.
I don't remember anything different, including, and this is something that was pointed out ad nauseum, that Dana White was never wearing any sort of mask or protection of any kind.
Not one time.
So I recall that Dana was very clearly in the cage touching sweaty, bloody fighters and commission people, whoever he was high-fiving, and family members that were, whatever, anything like that kept on going on was business as usual, when in fact the 25-page document said, no, knock it off. Seriously, stop.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I'm kind of reminded of just basic like math class when we're talking about this, because this whole thing was about problem solving. It was all about trying to piece this puzzle together. How are you going to solve this problem of putting on live sports, a sport that involves contact through training, contact through actual competition, and just the logistics of putting on this event with people traveling from around the world, or at least around the country. So in problem solving, one thing that you're always told in math, show your work. Dana White and the UFC have not shown their work. It's been more so, trust us. And when questioned, it's turned into something other than answering the questions at hand. Like the New York Times article elicited quite the response from Dana, courtesy of our buddy John Morgan, where he went off the rails and didn't answer the question. Didn't address a single thing that the article brought forward. So
John didn't even really get a chance to ask his question. I mean, it was off the rails before the question even got out.
Right. I mean, we know Dana doesn't like the guy who wrote it, and I guess that's what's really important here.
Is the byline actually that fucking guy?
I believe that is his name. Yes.
Something like that.
At least that's what they called him in high school. So
okay.
I'm not quite sure if we can say it's a success without having some time removed. And quite frankly, even with time, if transparency isn't there, we can't say. Now, if we're talking about from a financial standpoint, sure, 700,000 pay-per-view buys, UFC 249, having the attention of the overall sports world and fulfilling at least partial obligations to ESPN as your broadcast partner. Yeah, take the bag and run with it. But
with regard to the attention of the overall sports world, that's what I'm saying. Like my wife, at one point, I had something on the screen on Saturday night, and she goes, I believe it was Paul Felder's in there, and she goes, "Oh, he's in there interviewing." She asked that question. Like she just asked that question. And if my wife represents someone who doesn't always watch the sport, someone who's just tuning in for the first time and they see cage fights happening, and they're like, "Oh, that guy's in there, interviewing him." Why is that? So I don't know if it was success in that regard, in terms of what maybe the general public would think of the UFC during this pandemic, but definitely from a financial standpoint, it was a success. But you know what? I was reminded of something, and you guys may have stumbled upon this on Twitter, but there was somebody who had tweeted something out, and it was about good process, bad process, good outcome, bad outcome.
Yes.
And what that means, I think we're in this overall with the UFC. I would say it wasn't necessarily a good process. I'd categorize as the process of them doing it was bad. The outcome was good, so that falls under dumb luck. We're in the dumb luck stage at the moment.
Oh, dude, it's like playing darts in the dark. Like, you might hit the bullseye, but you don't deserve to. And when they flip the lights back on, it's not replicable. You can't explain that, like, this is a model for the rest of combat sports and the rest of the sports world. Just do what we did and you'll be fine. So even if nobody involved in this ends up, like, getting COVID-19 from exposure at these events, it is a failure. Like, flat out, it's a failure. Even if nobody gets sick, it was a failure of process. It hasn't paved the way to doing anything safely going forward.
Dumb luck. We're in dumb luck.
Right.
We're in dumb luck zone right now.
I mean, one thing that we always talk about from a marketing standpoint with the UFC is like their inability to market beyond a certain limited scope, and somehow or another they just fall upwards into certain stars and certain successes and whatnot. And this could be just another chapter in falling upwards, in creating some level of success through no fault of your own. So it'd be very interesting to see if we're having much deeper, darker discussions in the next coming weeks. But I certainly hope that all of our complaints about what's been going on are just wasted energy. I certainly hope so, because we have much bigger issues to worry about as in regards to this sport, or in regards to just humanity in general, if this ends up being a true disaster.
Fingers crossed it's not.
There we go. Now let's move on to perhaps the greatest segment in all of media history, the title that is I cannot give this enough praise, and it is called I Am Not Surprised, Mr. Falcons. This is where we get to share with you guys something that surprised us or didn't surprise us over the week from the fight coverage, whether it be pre-fight, post-fight, the fights themselves, related news, etc., etc. So we will start with Ben. Ben, what is your I'm Not Surprised, Mr. Falcons moment this week?
Well, this will actually be a follow-up to this same segment a few months ago, back in January. Remember, back before the world changed? But it was actually
I was alive then.
3 years ago?
Yes. It was a week that you were out and you had something going on. And so Jay and I ran the show with our friend Kristen King from My MMA News. And my segment was about a regional fighter named Sean Cerveny. He's a 5-0 bantamweight who had competed at LFA 80 in New Mexico the weekend before. 5-0, 5 first-round submissions, including some sassy stuff like some ankle locks, heel hooks, things like that. But the thing about him was I saw him at Fury Fighting Championship here in Houston the summer before, and it was his first fight back after like 5 years off, and I was really impressed because, you know, I watch a lot of regional MMA. It's kind of what I'm here for. And he completely ran game on a guy who's a pretty good grappler, like a local Texas guy. And in like 50 seconds, it was one of those like Looney Tunes clouds of like fists and feet flying, and ended up getting like a heel hook that transitioned to an Achilles lock. It was nasty, and I couldn't find out anything about Sean Cerveny. And so when he popped up again at LFA in January, I talked about him, and I said, hey, Sean, if you're out there, get at me, because I actually want to talk to you for the site and, you know, just kind of, you know, find out what your story is. He actually found me this week. So I don't know how that worked. I guess our dozens and dozens of fans, you know, just amplified my signal. But Sean reached out to me, and the interesting thing is I commented about that LFA win that his opponent got up complaining that he hadn't tapped, you know, to the armbar. And I said, I'm not even going to weigh in on whether he tapped or not, or it was a bad stoppage, because the way the fight was going, he was just staving off what was going to happen within the next couple minutes of cage time anyway. It turns out that in the intervening time, the New Mexico Athletic Commission actually vacated that win, reverted it to a no contest, and they did so without notifying either Sean or apparently the ref. So I have an inquiry out to the New Mexico Athletic Commission, which I'm sure is running on a skeleton crew right now. I'm not expecting a whole ton of, a whole ton of quick movement on this, but apparently they had time to reverse that result. So I'll be talking to Sean sometime before his next fight, once the world returns to some semblance of normalcy, and I'll definitely follow up with what happened with this, because obviously fights can be reversed after the fact in light of new evidence or in light of administrative decisions, but for it to happen without one of the fighters and the referee being at least involved or informed, something smells. So I'm on the trail. It's that 1 week out of the year that I resemble a journalist, and I will follow up on a future episode.
All right. Well, maybe they changed their numbers. All right, Simon, what is your I'm not surprised Mr. Falcon's moment this week?
I'm not surprised that Henry Cejudo's manager, Ali Abdelaziz, would come out and say that he's not going to retire and it's not going to hold up. Shocker. Complete shocker. Yeah, we didn't really think that was going to hold for very long. Here's also what would not surprise me, and this is a hypothetical sort of would not surprise me, but if there was any truth to the theory that Henry Cejudo did what he did as some sort of negotiating tactic, how surprised are we that he would just be undercut by his manager, basically coming out and saying, "Oh, he's going to be back." I don't know if that's without realizing it or not, but if Cejudo had any sort of hopes of being able to negotiate anything, it's all out the window. There's no chance. It's all done.
And so we joked in this space last week about him fighting at strawweight. Like, now that he's been cut off at the knees by his own manager, I'm pretty sure he's walking around at about 115. So make it happen.
We can't be surprised though. What leverage does he have? And et cetera, et cetera. We can go on and on about all that stuff. So
that's
not surprised.
Most Ali thing ever.
Yeah, wow. Henry's going to be back in the cage looking like Hank Hill's dad. So, Jay, what is your I'm not surprised Mr. Falcon's moment this week?
So, man, I had this whole segment geared up. I was going to talk about Dominick Cruz, because last week we were discussing, Dominick Cruz, he said a couple things about referee Keith Peterson. He smelled like alcohol, blah, blah, blah. So we all, in the last episode, expected Cruz would come back and be like, yeah, it was heat of the moment. And then whatever. But no, he went straight into Jacuzzi mode. So no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a very surprising story that came out today that we kind of knew about. Khabib Nurmagomedov broke silence today. And it's the first time he's spoken about his family and his personal situation in a while now. Because reports had come out, RT and RT Sport and some other Russian outlets had written about how Khabib's father, Abubakar, he was very ill, then he was hospitalized, he was transported to a special hospital, he was in a coma, recovered from the coma. Very unfortunate and dire news, but we didn't have much confirmation from the family, because Khabib and his family are notoriously, they keep their cards close to the vest. So Khabib came out with a video today where, among other things, he explained that, yes, this is true, that this is all true. This is what we've been dealing with: hospitalization, coma, critical condition, which is really sad. And our thoughts are with his father. But the disease, that COVID-19 has spread to his family in a massive way. There's something like upwards of 20 of his other family members have had it and are either currently ill or passed away from it. And we don't know what that meant. I don't know. Maybe you guys have gotten more insight since that video came out, but that was a terrifying thing that suddenly that we had no idea about, because all we knew about is that I can't remember. It was a fellow fighter who fights out of Fighting Eagle camp, I believe. Also came down with it as well. But I think he was like an ACA or WCFA or one of those organizations. But that's all we really knew. So to now find out that 20 plus people in his family have come down with it is just, whoa, oh my gosh. Yeah. I hope he's okay. I hope they're okay. I mean, that's just, I'm surprised. Whoa.
All right. And let the smart folks tell it, then he was ducking Tony Ferguson. So Yeah,
Oh,
just
man.
they're just one of those reminders that these fighters have real lives, real families, real concerns that are much more important than whatever we entertain ourselves with over the weekend. So that should definitely bring that one home. I'm not surprised Mr. Falcon's moment this week is actually a lot tamer than that. I mean, I'm just surprised that Edson Barboza actually made 145. One of the leaner guys on the roster. I didn't know where the extra 10 pounds was going to come from, and somehow or another he showed up and he actually had a chin. I was very surprised to see him take some really flush shots from Ige and not completely go out. So wow, just Edson Barboza at 145 just still doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I guess that's what we're going to see in the future. And he performed much better than I expected on Saturday. All right, fellas. So now it is time for me to flex my authority on you mofos as we start to wrap things up, and that is through the speed bag. This is where you guys answer questions. You've got 10 seconds to answer each question. So I'm going to start with you, Jay. Now, first question. What are the odds that the UFC puts together Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou?
Unless Ngannou wins the belt, that fight's not going to happen. Ngannou's not going to 205, and Jones isn't going to go do the Anderson Silva route and fight non-title heavyweight fights. So champ or bust?
Slim to none. None of the parties really seem to want it, so it's not going to happen.
And Simon?
Not happening. It's not happening. Jon Jones was just talking about wanting a 220-pound catchweight fight, and then to go straight to the scariest guy in the division. Not happening. Not happening at all.
All right. Second question. I'll start with you on this one, Ben. Would you consider the first round of Matt Brown versus Miguel Baeza deserving of round of the year?
Sort of. I mean, it's probably in the top 5, but then it's also barely in the top 3 rounds of that night of fights. So, like, who can say?
All right. And Simon?
Maybe off the top of my head, though, I'd have to think that there was a round between Joanna and Wiley that was better than that one.
All right. And Jay?
Yeah, I mean, that round was just pure chaos. It was one of those rounds, like Thiago Santos, Jimmy Manuwa, that kind of, whoa, violence. It's in contention, but we're going to see how it happens.
All right. And last question. I'll start with you on this one, Simon. How did you react when the UFC aired the massive shin cut on Gabriel Benitez during Wednesday's broadcast?
I threw up, and then I threw up again, and then I ate dinner, and then I threw up again after that. That was fucking disgusting.
Jay.
Man, that warning was not enough. But here's the weird thing. The first thing I thought of was Kristen King because of how much fun she must have had seeing that cut.
Ben.
I walked into the room and saw it out of context. So at first I was like, oh, what is this? And then I was like, oh, God,
no. Oh, man. Oh, wow. Beautiful job, Ben. All right. Okay, so now the clock changes to 30 seconds. And this is where I will answer all 3 questions. The clock will start after reading the first question. What are the odds that the UFC puts together Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou? I think the odds are them cutting the check, but quite frankly, I don't think Jones really want that smoke. He's been talking about heavyweight. Then he talks about whatever's going to get him attention on Twitter. Now, what I consider Matt Brown versus Miguel Baeza round of the year, I don't know. I'm with Simon. Weili Zhang versus Joanna. It's gotta fit somewhere in there. If not, Izzy Romero. Okay, now the massive shin cut on Gabriel Benitez. After seeing my own shin in half, I was good.
Oh.
So yeah.
It was,
the only other. No, what were you saying, Jay?
Our Sure Dog out of there. Oh, hold on. Come back to me.
All right.
He's got flashbacks of it.
One of the things I kept thinking about when I saw that is like if this were like an action movie, he would have had a razor blade like stashed in there. He would have pulled the razor blade out and cut through the zip ties and escaped or something. So that's just a random thought. You okay, Jay?
Yeah, I'm good. It was something that Sure Dog editor-in-chief Mike Furley posted the picture on Twitter, and somebody responded with a killer tweet. They said, all right, guys, how drunk would you have to be?
Oh man.
Oh, well,
That was all I had.
to that I say 3 beers. Okay, so all right, so we'll wrap it up with this one, fellas. Kevin Randleman was announced as the next inductee of the UFC Hall of Fame. How will you remember Kevin Randleman?
I can start. I'll just go back to I'll always remember the first impression that Kevin Randleman made on me when I saw him, which would have been sometime in the early 2000s, 2001, or maybe it was right after he won the UFC title in 1999. I just remember when I saw that guy for the first time, the blonde hair stood out, and I didn't know anything about Kevin Randleman, mind you, at the time. Did not know that he was an Ohio State national champion. Saw that guy though, and I go, that guy's a wrestler. I knew instantly he was a wrestler. That physique was just off the charts, crazy wrestler physique through and through. And when we saw him fight through the years after that he's one of the reasons why I started paying attention casually to MMA, just kind of from a distance. I have a wrestling background. I was a wrestler in high school at the time. So when I saw a guy who looked like a wrestler, who was in there, and then you saw him doing what he was doing to his opponents, I was like, wow, this guy's beast. That's the way I'll remember him. Just the first impression that he made on me.
All right, Jay, any thoughts on Randleman's induction?
Yeah, I do, and it's kind of a personal aside. I'll be honest. I was never much for a fan of Mauro Ranallo on play-by-play. Just something about him for a while. Like, I remember the first time I saw him call fights. I think it was in Bellator last year. Anyway, I always felt like he replaced Quadros, so I felt it was a little off-putting. And so when Mauro called the fight with Bas Rutten and Heath Herring, when Randleman fought Mirko Cro Cop, it felt different, and I felt more okay with Mauro at the time. The call of the insane shriek, and I don't want to blow the microphone out, of Kevin Randleman has knocked out Mirko Cro Cop, the monster has knocked out Mirko Cro Cop. Watching that happen, and being familiar with him and what he'd done beforehand, sure, but the feel of that fight was a different feel than a lot of fights that I've seen in my many years of this. I felt the goosebumps. I rewatched it again after the induction thing happened, and I felt those same things. That, Randleman had plenty of his moments, and everybody has their own little thoughts, whether it's the staph infection of his whole side, or it's his character, or it's everything about him. But man, that the performance he had against the kickboxing death machine Cro Cop and all of that, coming off of losses, going after the Grand Prix to see if he had anything in there, and then his post-fight interview where he said, you don't think I'm scared, you don't think I feel this, but I do it for you, and the whole everything about it is the perfect embodiment for how I feel and see Kevin Randleman. Like, that's the whole package, and that I'm happy that he's in the Hall of Fame, because that's Kevin Randleman. He's the man.
All right, and Ben.
Yeah, I mean, just nothing but thanks for the memories. Similar to Simon, he's one of the first guys that caught my eye because he was a wrestler, and I did know who he was as a wrestler, and yeah, I mean, obviously the points against him are out there for anybody to grab. It's low-hanging fruit. He's at or near the top of any list of fighters who didn't live up to their potential. But in spite of that, if we got 40% of Kevin Randleman's potential, my God, look at the memories we got. Just some indelible moments, both of triumph and of loss. And through it all, he was just a guy, just pure emotion, like just all heart, like tough and aggro, and at the same time, incredibly vulnerable. Randleman's a hero. And if the pioneer wing of the UFC's Hall of Fame, which is the only part of that Hall of Fame that means shit to me, is for enshrining guys like him whose one-loss record does not reflect how important they were, great move.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So my thoughts on Kevin Randleman, I mean, as a young black guy getting into mixed martial arts, definitely weren't a lot of faces that I could identify with definitely wasn't a huge huge amount of African American fighters in mixed martial arts. So Kevin Randleman was partly responsible for my fandom. Just catching my attention. Oh, it's a black guy, so I'm going to watch this, you know. And so on that bit, like I definitely appreciate Randleman for what he was able to accomplish, and always found himself in very exciting fights. So it was just always something to watch with him. But I will end it on this note. So I thought the timing of his announcement of the induction was quite perfect. I was reminded of a story that Jordan Breen used to tell all the time about, I don't know if he was telling it secondhand for it was Jeff Sherwood's story or Breen was there, but he talked about on some bus during Pride, like they bus the fighters from the hotel to the arena. And at some point, Kevin Randleman felt challenged to show his member to everyone on the bus. And this induction came right after we made all of our dick jokes about Song Yadong. So the timing couldn't have been any more beautiful. So with that, we'll wrap things up for this edition of Unleashed. Once again, thank you to our guest, Simon Samano, for joining the panel.
Thank you, guys.
Oh, absolutely, man. Anytime, floor is yours. Come on and anytime you want, man. So you can follow him on the Twitter handle you see below. In fact, all of us have our Twitter handles below through the beauty of post-production. You can find Simon's work on MMA Junkie. You can find Jay and Ben's work on Sherdog.com. Some of my work on Sherdog.com, MMA On Point, my MMA News as well. But you know what you got to do. You got to like, subscribe, share, tell a friend to tell a friend, tell that friend to tell 10 more friends. Now, you must stay beautiful. You must stay positive. And through it all, you got to stay sexy. I will see you when I see you. Peace.